and I believe that you're going to talk just for 10-15 minutes, and most of the session is going to be given over to you. Okay, so I hope you've got lots of questions prepared. Yes, I'm not going to take up too much of the time, okay, so I want the speaker to have as much time as possible to talk to you. So, over to you.
Well, Denise, thank you very much indeed. I shall always remember you for two reasons. First, the room is full, and that's always encouraging to any visiting speaker. Secondly, in human terms, it's the most wonderful, inspiring, energizing thing if when you walk into a room, there is a large bunch of smiling faces and people who are generous enough to applaud as though they're enthusiastic, as opposed to being a kind of conscript army. So thank you very much indeed. Denise had originally suggested that I come to an awards dinner event at which I think she had it in mind for me to speak, but I wasn't available to do that, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to be with you today. And let me say at the outset that I'm very conscious of and full of respect for the way in which this college has grown, the fantastic site that you now enjoy, and in particular, the success that the college, which, let's face it, means the success which the students here have achieved. In terms of breadth, it's very impressive to be offering 40 A-level courses or thereabouts, and I think about 20 BTEC courses, and last time I looked, my briefing told me that 3/4 of students here go on to university or other forms of higher education from here, and there's even a very substantial number who go to Russell Group universities. You've got a distinguished glitterati of Luton College alumni as well, and on so many levels you seem to be doing so well on ICT and arts and media and publishing and language and literature and culture, to give but a few examples. So it's clearly a vibrant and dynamic place, and I think I'm correct in saying that upwards of 60%, somewhere between 62 and 63% of students here are from minority ethnic communities, which is even significantly greater than in the local population of Luton itself. So in terms of being diverse and inclusive, and if I can put it this way, representative of modern Britain, you have a hugely impressive story to tell. I always feel that I have to treat at the outset of one sensitive matter which your natural courtesy will probably disincline you to raise with me directly, but which, if unaddressed, will lurk perilously in the undergrowth, and that is the sensitive matter of height. Specifically, it's often said that I am the shortest man ever to be speaker. Now look, I say to short people assembled in this room in the spirit of diversity and inclusivity, there's nothing wrong with being short. We short people should stick together. We may be short, but we might also be perfectly formed. In fact, even Dr. Edge Watchhorn, the head of our education service, is relatively short, though she's not relatively short in the way that I'm relatively short. We may be short, but we may also be, as I say, perfectly formed. But in any case, it's quite wrong when some of these more fifth-rate scribblers say, oh, well, Bercow is the shortest man to be speaker. Sir John Bussey, Speaker of the House, from 1394 to 1398, Sir John Wenlock, Speaker of the House in 1455 until 1456, and Sir Thomas Tresham, Speaker of the House in 1459, are all believed to have been shorter than I am, although I do have to admit that this was true only when all three of them had been beheaded. Indeed, no fewer than 7 of my predecessors met their end on the executioner's table. One was killed in battle, and a further poor unfortunate soul was brutally murdered. So you will understand that this does enable me to view the woes and challenges which afflict and confront the House of Commons, and sometimes which periodically afflict and confront me, with an appropriate sense of historical proportion. That means whatever else happens to me, I'm not likely to lose my head, and it's a huge privilege to be Speaker, as well as a constituency Member of Parliament representing Buckingham. I greatly enjoy it, and for so long as I can do the job in a way that is of any benefit, I'm obviously keen to try to make my contribution. I am keen to open up to questions, and therefore what I'd like to do is simply to cover three things very, very briefly. First, my best known and most visible function is to chair the proceedings in the chamber, to chair, of course, Prime Minister's questions, but every other question time session, the delivery, that is to say, the announcement of government policies in the form of ministerial statements in the House, which tend to be followed by extensive questioning, and I chair, obviously, every day a great many debates in the chamber. That is, I think, widely recognised and understood, but that is what the Speaker does. And in that capacity, I am, for the avoidance of doubt, not a participant in the debates, but the referee or umpire of them. And I am, more broadly perhaps, analogous to be compared with a referee or even the head teacher of a school, in the sense that the role of the Speaker is to keep order, encourage people to take part, and try to cut down on the number of people who have to be excluded altogether as a result of bad behaviour. I'm not expected to play for one side or the other, and indeed I'm expected and required to play for no side, but simply to be the facilitator of the match. And in that capacity, I have to decide, beyond those who've already drawn lucky in our daily ballot for question time, and therefore have a right to ask a question, who else should I call to ask a question or to make a speech in a debate? So in a sense, my first requirement is to know the name of every colleague and his or her constituency, and I then go back and forth from one side to the other, and I'm looking to call women who are on the whole rather better behaved in the House, as well as men. I'm looking to call people from Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, as well as from England, and from different parts of those areas. I'm looking to call people who were elected to the House 50 years ago, like the father of the House, Sir Peter Tapsell, but also someone like Liz McInnes, who was elected in a by-election 3 months ago, because they're both paid by the taxpayer, they both represent constituencies, they both have a right to be heard and a duty to contribute. And I'm looking to call people, colleagues, representing a variety of different points of view. So I'm not trying to prosecute or advance, or indeed for that matter, to retard the expression of any point of view. What I'm seeking to do is to facilitate the fullest and fairest expression of opinions which exist in the House, for which purpose it is also necessary not for me to have any sort of encyclopedic knowledge of what every colleague thinks on every subject, but to have a broad awareness of my colleagues. So, for example, on Europe, British membership thereof, which is a big political issue, in respect of which there are divisions not just between parties, but within parties, it's up to me to know that on the Tory side, Bill Cash is a Eurosceptic, but Bob Walter is a Tory MP who's very pro-European, and on the Labour side, Peter Hain or Keith Vaz would be good examples of strong pro-Europeans, but Gisela Stewart and Kelvin Hopkins, local MP in Luton, are very, very Eurosceptic. The Speaker has to know that, and the Speaker tries to ensure that everybody gets a fair crack at it. Can I please, everybody, answer what are those pigs I see flying in front of my very eyes? It's completely impossible to satisfy everybody. There are some colleagues who are perfectly convinced that no debate would not be improved by a contribution from them at great length and equal eloquence, but I can't satisfy everybody all the time. You just try to do your best to ensure the fairest and most reasonable spread of contributors. So that's my first function. The second function, as far as I'm concerned, in the modern age, is to try to facilitate desired change. So when I stood for election, I said, I think Parliament is dying, questions are too long, answers are too long, people aren't getting enough opportunity to contribute, the government isn't being properly scrutinised, Parliament frankly needs to be more dynamic, more hard-hitting, more assertive, more topical, more vibrant, and more effective. And there's only so much the Speaker can do, but if you elect me, I'll speed up question time, which I have done, and enable more people to contribute. If you elect me, I'll insist that ministers make key policy statements in Parliament first, not through the media. And if they don't, well, I will view very sympathetically applications to the Speaker that are made for permission to put urgent questions to ministers on matters that have just arisen or in respect of which some controversy has just been generated, So the minister will have to come to the House to answer for his or her policies. Now that has happened. Question time is quicker. Urgent questions were hardly ever granted in the 8 years before I was elected Speaker. My predecessor, who was a very good and decent guy, was not keen on urgent questions. He felt they were media generated and didn't want to allow them very often. In the year before I became Speaker, there were 2 granted by the Speaker all year. In my first year, I think we had 24. We've had a little over 200 over the last 5 years. And what that means is ministers having to come to the House to answer for their policies. I also argued that the deputy speakers should be elected, not appointed by the government and the Leader of the Opposition. All the deputy speakers, I have 3, are now elected by the House. I argued that the people who chair our important committees should be elected by the House, not appointed by government and opposition whips. All of those people are now elected. They've got new authority, they're more assertive, their inquiries are more far-reaching. So you've got people like Keith Vaz chairing the Home Affairs Committee and Andrew Tyree chairing the Treasury Select Committee. These guys are feared chairs whose committees are doing incredibly important work in holding the government of the day to account. Because that, students, is what Parliament is supposed to do, to probe, to question, to challenge, to scrutinise, to contradict, sometimes even perhaps to expose the failings of the government of the day. And the Speaker's role is to be a cheerleader for the rights of backbench MPs, to scrutinise what we call the executive branch of the political system. I also argued that we ought to have a backbench business committee that chooses the business of the House as often as possible. Well, that now happens 35 days in every year. Pretty much every week that we sit, one day, the business is chosen by what we call BBCom, the Backbench Business Committee. And whether the government wants to come and answer the debate or not, whether the government likes the choice of debate or not, whether the government finds it convenient or not, the government simply has to field a minister to respond. And several things in this Parliament have moved as a result of backbench business debates. For better or for worse, the government's policy on the European referendum was shifted because the Backbench Business Committee held a debate on the European referendum, which led to a huge revolt by Conservative MPs against their own side. We've now got a commitment to ban the use of wild animals in circuses because a particular MP went and got a debate through the Backbench Business Committee that the government had been blocking. So you can see the respect in which BBCom has been a trigger or a catalyst for pressure on the government and changes in policy. So that's a second function of the Speaker, not to make change, but to try to express support for, and if you like, to catalyse change for which there is support in the House. My third function is to meet and greet people from across the country and around the world, and more widely, in my view, to try to be an ambassador for Parliament and a robust advocate of democratic politics. So, of course, I've met all sorts of people in Parliament, visitors from schools, ambassadors, speakers, President Obama, Aung San Suu Kyi, to name but a few. But I've also made a big point of chairing the UK Youth Parliament every year and going to the Youth Parliament's annual general meeting or conference every year. And my reasoning there is very simple. If we want to be in Parliament, once again, respected by young people, we must show some respect for young people. Respect is not a matter of automatic right, but it's an earned entitlement, and respect is a two-way street. And when I started out as Speaker, I said that I would like to add to the functions of the Speaker this outreach role. And one of my very senior colleagues, who shall remain nameless and who did not vote for me to become Speaker, came up to me a few months into my tenure as Speaker and said to me as follows: "Mr. Speaker," he said, "I didn't vote for you to be Speaker. I voted for Sir George Young, because he's a bloody good egg. I know you vote for you. I think I'm really jolly well, like I say so. I think I'm really jolly good job, Chair. Well done, you keep it up. I think we'll do frankly well." But he said, "I don't know mind if I just make a point." And I said, "No, please make your point." He said, I see you're already sort of committed to this outreach business. He said, "I'm afraid I don't get it." So I explained to him my reasoning for visiting schools and colleges and universities and faith groups, charitable organisations and so on. And he said, "Well, I don't know, I don't think it's a frightfully good idea. I don't think it's a very good idea." And I said, why do you not think so? He said, "Well, I think the office has been very important office, very established office, very historic office, but very, very significant." Because I don't think the Speaker, I don't think a Speaker should be going out sort of visiting schools, colleges, rather below the level of the Speaker. People want to see the Speaker. People should come to Parliament. You can see when you're chair. But I don't think the Speaker should be going visiting schools. It's sort of a bit below the level of the office of Speaker. And I said to him, well, I respect you being so honest, but I completely disagree with you. In the modern age, you cannot just sort of look and sound important and be pompous and expect people to respect you. You've got to be prepared to get out there and make a case for yourself and your institution and hear what people have to say to you. And so, I understand where you're coming from, but I said, I think if I may say so, the world you're talking about is gone. And I'm talking about the world in which we now live. And in any case, I like meeting people and communicating, talking to people and hearing from people. So I'm going to go on with my approach. He said, my doing is a rum business. He said, it's a rum business, you visiting all these schools. So anyway, that is how I go about it. I hope I've given you a snapshot of my role in the chair, my role in trying to encourage desired change, and my role in trying to get out beyond the confines and parameters of House of Commons to talk about the work of Parliament. I think that we have achieved some worthwhile change over the last 5.5 years. We've just had a series of events recently. There'll be a lot more in the course of 2015 to mark 750 years since what is normally regarded as the first Parliament that took place, the de Montfort Parliament. But we've still got a lot to do if we're going to tackle public disillusionment. And I can think of a great many reforms that I would like to see made in the operations of Parliament in the course of the next few years. But I hope I've given you a sort of taster. I obviously can't respond to questions about party politics because the Speaker departs the party political stage. I'm no longer a member of a political party. When I stand for re-election in Buckingham in May, I stand as the Speaker seeking re-election. The major parties don't put up candidates against the Speaker because they want the Speaker to be returned to the House. There will be candidates against me. There's a UKIP candidate. Last time there was a fascist candidate, BNP, and so on and so forth. These trials and tribulations come along, but you do your best to deal with them. But I will happily respond as best I can to any inquiries you want to lob in my direction. And once again, perhaps I can just underline my respect for what this college has achieved over recent years and express the hope that you will thrive here and beyond educationally in career terms. And I leave you with the thought that I hope you will be lucky enough to do for a living what you enjoy, because that's my great privilege to be able to do for a living what I enjoy. Being MP for Buckingham and serving as Speaker. I have no plans to die tomorrow. If I were to die tomorrow, I would die happy, thinking, wow, haven't I been very lucky? And that's what I wish for you. So thank you very much for having me along. Apologies for the fact that traffic caused a bit of lateness, and I'll do my best to respond to what you have to say to me in the course of the next 30 or 40 minutes or so. Thank you very much indeed.
Do we have questions for Mr. Speaker, please? That young lady there.
Okay, my question is, how can high political salaries be justified, especially considering the state of one's economy?
How can high political salaries be justified, especially considering the state of the world economy? Well, I'm not sure that parliamentary salaries in the UK are notably high by comparison with parliamentary salaries in other countries. I think we're fairly average. I mean, the salaries of UK parliamentarians are higher than in some countries, but they're lower than in others. They're lower, for example, in the UK than they are in the United States. I mean, I don't think they're sort of strikingly high. If you mean, how do we justify them, say, for the sake of argument, being higher than, the average wage? I mean, I suppose what I would say to that is that in any of these matters, you have to have some regard to the need to attract decent quality candidates, people of some competence and ability. I don't think people come into Parliament, if I may say so. If you disagree, then I'll just have to respect that and we'll agree to differ. But I don't honestly think people come into Parliament in order to make a fortune, because you don't. It is absolutely true that MPs paid a salary of, what I think is now about £67,000 a year, are obviously paid a lot more than the national average wage. Most people I know in Parliament could make a somewhat bigger living outside of Parliament, and most, not all, but most, have done so. Very large numbers of people who serve in Parliament previously served in business or the professions, and a lot of them have taken a pay cut to come into Parliament. Now, I'm not saying that they're heroes or heroines for doing that, and that they deserve you to get out your violin and play in sympathy with them, and I don't suppose for one moment you will. It's their free choice to come into Parliament. But I think that to say, right, well, let's slash their salaries would be a slightly pointless thing to do. And I do think that one has to have some regard to the situation of people who have no other income. It wouldn't make any difference to really rich people who want to serve in Parliament because they don't depend on the parliamentary salary at all if they're very wealthy. But as far as people who perhaps served in significant positions in the professions, in the National Health Service, in the Education Service, in marketing, in management consultancy, maybe in the city or the media, would they, if they're earning 60, 70, 80, 100,000 pounds a year, come into Parliament if the salary was sort of 25,000 pounds? Well, they wouldn't. I mean, they simply wouldn't. So I think it's a fair point that MPs shouldn't come into Parliament to make a large amount of money, but I don't honestly think they do. And the last point I simply leave you with, students, is this. We got into a great mess 5-6 years ago in our expenses scandal because for a very long time every government said, we can't increase MPs' pay because the public won't wear it. And we had an expenses system which was a kind of income substitution, really, a right to claim housing costs and so on and so forth. That's gone. We now have an independent expenses regime, quite properly, run by an independent body which we don't control. And now, it wasn't the case at the beginning, but it is now the case, the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority is also setting MPs' pay. So instead of having the ridiculous situation, which hardly anybody else has, whereby MPs used to vote on their own pay, we don't. It is decided by the independent body. If the independent body recommends a rise, I personally think that the recommendation should be allowed to go through because it's determined independently. The independent body recommends a freeze, then it should be frozen. And theoretically, if the independent body recommended a cut, well then again, we should just accept that. It should be decided by a body independent of MPs.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Speaker? Yes.
With recent circumstances with Paris which I know of, what's your opinion on free speech and news?
Short answer is that I'm massively pro-free speech. I thought that was one of the great scandals of modern times. We had a demonstration, a spontaneous demonstration in Parliament by MPs and indeed members of the Westminster Press Gallery, if you like, in support of the people of Paris and of France. We stood in Westminster Hall with pens in the air to signify a belief in the power of the pen and the importance of free speech. If I'm absolutely pedantic in answering you, I would have to say, of course, we don't have completely free speech in our country, and I personally think it's right that you don't have absolutely untrammeled free speech because we have laws on sedition and incitement to racial hatred. I think that's right. Do I think it's right that we've got a law, for example, against incitement to racial hatred? I do. I don't think people should be allowed to walk along the street inciting people to kill Jewish people or to kill black or Asian people. So, there are some restrictions on free speech. But do I think that there is a danger that people who feel offended by criticism of their religion think that somehow that criticism should be banned, or that criticism is a justification for violence? I do think there is a danger of that happening, and that clearly is what has recently arisen. In Paris, there are people who feel that if a religion is pilloried, if it is criticised or lampooned or caricatured, then because they're offended by that, they've got a right to react with violence. Well, I'm afraid I don't accept that. I believe very strongly that people should be allowed to have argument and debate about religious practices. I mean, I am myself of Jewish origin. I'm not a strongly religious person, but I'm of Jewish origin. People have got different views about the law on ritual slaughter, for example, of animals. and you'll be aware, that there are different viewpoints on this. If the attitude, the traditional attitude of the Jewish religion to ritual slaughter were criticised, even in very aggressive terms, would I say that should be made illegal? I would not. No, I would say people are perfectly entitled to their views about these matters. And I basically subscribe to Voltaire's view, which is, I disagree with what you say, but I defend to the death your right to say it. And, I take very much a je suis Charlie approach to these matters. And I think people who feel that it is legitimate to resort to extreme violence, or indeed any violence, in order to show their anger or disapproval of what someone else has said about them or their religion, need a wake-up call. If we accept that logic, frankly, there will be a complete freeze on free speech, and that will be disastrous for the concept of a free and democratic society. I think there is a difference between people being offended and people being seriously harmed. And people have got to be prepared to be offended in a free society. That's the price we pay for freedom of speech. And even people sort of saying, oh, well, I'm offended by that and therefore it should be made illegal. All sorts of people say offensive things. It doesn't mean that they should be criminalised. It certainly doesn't mean that they should be attacked or subject to terrorist assault.
Thank you very much. Got another question, Mr. Speaker? That lady there.
What reforms to Parliament would I suggest? Well, I think there are a number, to be honest. I still feel this will probably sound like a really internal point. You may sort of wonder what the significance of it is, but I still feel that too much of the agenda of Parliament is controlled by the government. And for the avoidance of doubt, I know some of you are studying, or a lot of you are studying government or politics. Government and Parliament are not terms that should be used as though they were synonymous. They're not the same thing. In the British system, members of the government do sit in Parliament in a way that they don't in the United States. There's a separation of powers in the United States, so members of the Obama administration don't sit in Congress. In the British Parliament, ministers do sit in Parliament, but ministers in the House of Commons amount to about 80 people. There are 650 MPs, so the vast majority of members of the House of Commons are not ministers. And I believe they ought to have more say in determining what the debates are that take place and how time is allocated. We do have this thing called the Backbench Business Committee, but I've been arguing for years, and I know some of my colleagues agree, that there should be a House Business Committee so that all government business is scheduled by a committee which isn't just the government chief whip meeting with the opposition chief whip and stitching it up in a room behind closed doors. I think there ought to be a proper committee hearing representations on behalf of local MPs and regional interests, deciding what is going to be the schedule of business for the next week. And I think it should ideally be a votable proposition. People should have a right to table amendments and suggest that different subjects be brought forward. So I would like to make the programming of the business of Parliament more open and more democratic than it is. That's one quite important reform. Secondly, I would like the way the House is run to be modernised. We had a considerable row in Parliament last summer running into the autumn because the most senior procedural person in the House, the clerk, retired and we had to appoint a new clerk. And in my view, quite wrongly, the clerk was also the chief executive of the House. And I argued that that should be changed because a clerk is like a sort of constitutional specialist, who understands procedure. But does that mean that he or she's got any particular expertise in how to manage a large employer, which is also a World Heritage Site? No, I don't think clerks have got any particular expertise in that field. So anyway, we are now getting a split. We're going to employ a clerk and a separate top manager, a director general. But we've got to do so without costing a great deal more, so we'll have to make savings elsewhere. I'd like to see that reform bedded down. We're about to recruit a clerk and we'll then recruit a director general. I'd like to see that new modern management structure bedded down in the course of the next 5 years, and I'd like to be there to oversee that process if possible. I'd also like to see us get rid of some of our more confusing language. We've just published a report under my chairmanship, the report of the Digital Democracy Commission, And one of the things we said was that everything that we do in Parliament should be capable of being understood by the electorate. And quite a lot of what we do is not immediately understandable. Some of our practices are quite quaint. Some people don't understand the use of parliamentary language. We have things called adjournment debates. I bet not that many of you know what an adjournment debate is. If what we mean is a debate at the end of the day, why don't we just call it an end-of-day debate? And, you know, if people would find it easier to communicate by referring to each other by name, maybe the House should consider whether to move in that direction. At the moment, we call people honourable and right honourable gentlemen. And somebody who's a lawyer is called an honourable and learned member. Somebody who's served at a certain level in the armed forces is normally referred to as the honourable and gallant gentleman. You know, and some people like that, and some people think, well, these are very old-fashioned terms. This is all very sort of weird and confusing. It's not very accessible. So I would quite like to see that change. I also personally would like to see people have the chance, subject to the safety of the ballot, the integrity of the ballot, i.e. it mustn't be corrupted or subject to fraud. I'd like to see by 2020 people having the right to vote online if they want. I don't say people should be obliged to vote online. If you want to go to a polling station and put a cross on a ballot paper with a pencil, which is the traditional British method, fine, but I don't see why people shouldn't be able to vote online if they want to. So those are some of the things that I'd like to see changed over the next few years. And, you know, for better or for worse, whether you agree with me or not, I think I am usually regarded as Speaker as a reformer. I think the other day, Nick Robinson, the BBC's political correspondent, described me as something of a revolutionary, or whatever. Well, I'm not sure I call myself a revolutionary, but I certainly do believe in reforming, moving with the times, trying to make our procedures a bit more up to date and accessible to people.
Thank you very much. Do we have? Oh, we have lots of questions.
Right,
Shall we,
right.
we go along that way? We'll start with you, young man, please.
You, of course, voted for the Iraq War 10 years ago now,
Yeah.
which resulted in about 500,000 innocent civilians being killed. So, in hindsight, what do you think? Was your decision right, or do you regret it now?
I don't regret it, to be honest, and I'll give you an absolutely candid answer. Look, let me say to you, by the way, first of all, you may well disagree with me, and you probably do. Secondly, I've made more than my fair share of mistakes over the years, and I'm sure I'll make further mistakes, because that's, you know, what is the old expression? The reality of life. To err is to be human. So I'm not one of those people who's going to come to you and say that I think everything I've done has been right. I think I have made mistakes in my career. I can give you an example if you want. I think there are a number of mistakes I've made over the years and over the decades. I've never regretted voting for the Iraq War, and I'll tell you in a nutshell why. You're absolutely right, there were innocent civilians who lost their lives, but that is in the nature of war. That is what happens in war. To your question, was the war justified? And were those of us who voted for the war justified? In my view, yes. If you were an MP who voted for the war because you thought that there was an imminent threat of weapons of mass destruction, then I can understand why you'd be very bitter subsequently. I've never accepted the argument, I may well be very unpopular in saying this, but it's my honest view, I've never accepted the argument that Tony Blair lied about there being weapons of mass destruction. I don't believe that's true at all. I don't think Tony's a liar. I think what he does have, in quite extreme form, is a tendency, which most politicians have, but I think he has it in quite an extreme form, to hype up, to overemphasise, to exaggerate points in his favour, and to play down rubbish or even just ignore points against his argument. He can quite easily become convinced of a line of argument, then run with it, and slightly miss some of the countervailing arguments or evidence. I think he was convinced that the intelligence was correct and there were weapons of mass destruction. Some MPs voted for the war because he managed to persuade them there were weapons of mass destruction. When they discovered that there weren't, they felt very let down. I didn't vote for the war for that reason. I voted for the war for two reasons. I was never clear in my mind whether there were weapons of mass destruction possessed by Saddam. I voted for the war for two reasons. First, because Saddam was guilty of multiple breaches of UN Security Council resolutions over a period of a decade or more, inconsistently flown in the face of international law and not being punished for doing so, point one. And point two, Saddam was guilty of quite the most appalling and egregious abuses of human rights that I had come across, including the use of chemical weapons against his own people. And I thought that he was a complete menace and a serial human rights abuser. and that he needed to be taken on. And I thought that on the principle of the UN responsibility to protect, that is to protect the citizens of the country, we were perfectly justified in going to war in Iraq. Now, you may disagree with me, but that was my reasoning. So I voted with Blair at that time. And although I think the planning for the post-war period was terrible, there was very little thought given to that, and the whole thing was poorly handled, I still think that it was justified to go to war. And despite everything, I still myself think that Iraq is better off without Saddam. So I absolutely accept that my answer won't please everybody, but it happens to be my view. And you know, politicians are always accused of sitting on the fence and refusing to give a clear answer. I hope you'll agree that even if my answer disappoints you, it does at least have the advantage of being clear. I have no regrets on that front. I do regret at one time, when I first came into politics, wrongly thinking that immigration was a huge threat to the country, joining a right-wing pressure group called the Monday Club, which was sort of vaguely, not formally affiliated to, but sort of loosely connected with the Conservative Party. I left that ghastly organisation in 1984. So I hope that if you believe in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, even if you think that I was part of it, which I was, a ghastly, extreme right-wing group on the fringes of the Conservative Party, I did leave it more than 3 decades ago. And I think for a very long time I've been a very strong and public supporter of racial equality and sexual equality and equality for LGBT people and so on. But I was wrong on those issues a long time ago.
Thank you. And there was another gentleman, yeah.
Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, you're perceived as a liberal. Why then did you join the Conservative Party and only to resign many years later due to collective ministerial responsibility?
Yes. What's your name?
Mohammed Saeed.
Mohammed says I'm widely regarded as a liberal, as liberal-minded. Therefore, why on earth did I join the Conservative Party in the first place, only eventually to resign from the shadow cabinet? Because I disagree with my party's policy. Well, the short answer is that I was motivated to join the Conservative Party by two things. When I was at school, which was in the 70s, we had a thing called the Winter of Discontent, with streets unswept, sick people untreated, dead people unburied. There was a wave of strikes across the public sector in the winter of 1978-9, when I was sort of 15, coming up to 16. There was a Labour government in office. Most of my school teachers in Finchley were either supporters of the Labour government or left-wing critics of it, but they certainly weren't Conservatives. And I rather rebelled against their views. My father, I admit, was a small businessman and he was a Conservative. And the negative then was that I didn't like the Labour government. I thought it was a pretty crap administration. It ran the country poorly. The unions were holding the country for ransom. And secondly, I was at school in Finchley, and Mrs. Thatcher, who's no longer with us, was the Conservative leader, and I met her. I went to listen to her speak at a meeting at a neighbouring school in the Finchley constituency 3 days, I think, before polling day in 1979. And I suppose I was quite pushy. I made a point of getting myself introduced to her at the end, and I told her how much enjoyed and admired her speech. And she said to me, "Mr. Bercow, are you a member of the Young Conservatives?" And I said, "Well, I'm afraid I'm not, Mrs. Thatcher, but I have come along tonight to hear you. You very most assuredly should be," she said to me. She told me where to go to join, and I was very inspired by her. I thought she was a dynamic leader. I thought she was a transformative character. I thought she was one of the most decisive prime ministers. I stand by that view, but I later came to think that although she achieved a lot, I do think she achieved a lot, there were also big gaps. When she left office, there was a huge gulf between rich and poor. Public services were underfunded. There was terrible decay and underlying poverty and deprivation in some of our big cities. And those were problems the Conservatives had not addressed. And then later on, I thought, well, we kept losing post-1997. We kept getting rejected by the electorate. So it was a mixture of principle and practicality. I saw, well, we're just failing to reach out to quite large numbers of the electorate. And gradually, I just moved in my thinking more and more towards the centre. And there was one point, just in a spirit of fair-mindedness, really, when we were debating the age of consent for gay people in 1999, I think, and I slightly uncertainly voted for the statutory discrimination in favour of heterosexuals. But I wasn't very comfortable about it, and I thought, I'm not sure that's right. And I went away and thought about it, and a year later the same issue came back, and I persuaded myself, unlike most of my Conservative colleagues, that actually the age of consent should be equal for gay people as well as straight people. so I voted for equality, and that tended to cause me to reflect further on those issues. So in short, I gradually moved leftwards, more towards the centre. I never wanted to be a member of any other political party, but I did think, well, frankly, the Conservative Party has got to reach towards the centre. So, I eventually left the Conservative front bench when Ian Duncan-Smith was leader because I strongly disapproved of his policy on the rights of gay people and a number of his other policies as well. I had a brief spell on the Conservative front bench, I think, under Michael Howard's leadership, and I found that a fairly disillusioning experience as well. And having gone to the back benches, I thought to myself, I'm not really very happy serving under these various Conservative leaders. I think I prefer to do my own thing, pursue my own areas of interest, special educational needs policy, equalities policy, constitutional reform and so on. And I resolved around sort of 2005-06, well, I'll stay on the backbenches, and I would one day, because I'm passionate about Parliament, be quite interested in being Speaker. And that's really, what happened. And I eventually stood for Speaker in 2009. I can't say I had great encouragement from my former party. The Conservative Chief Whip said to me at the time, in a characteristically friendly way, for which I was very grateful, he said, John, you can stand for Speaker if you want, but you'll lose. And I said, well, I'm extremely grateful to you, Patrick, for that view. I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to say to that, but there's no shame in losing. There's no shame in losing. It's better to try and fail than not to try at all. And I said, actually, I may be wrong, Patrick. I said, but my reading of the situation is different to yours. You obviously think I'm going to lose. I said, I'm actually cautiously optimistic that I'm going to win. And, sort of the rest is history.
Thank you. I think there was a young man there with a question. Yeah?
Do you believe the age renewance of vote should be lowered or increased or kept the same?
Do I believe the voting age should be increased, reduced, or kept the same? It's quite a controversial subject between the political parties, and what I tend to say in answer to that question is, when I was free to express a view on this controversial issue, the record shows that I voted, or I'm not sure if it was a vote on in Parliament, but I argued in favour of reducing the voting age to 16 on the basis that if you were free to pay taxes and to have sex and to start working and with your parents' consent to get married, etc., and potentially to serve in the armed forces, I didn't see why you shouldn't be able to vote. Now that I'm not free to express views on these matters, I don't do so. But as I say, the record shows that with Jo Swinson, who's now a Liberal Democrat minister, at the time she was a backbencher, and a woman called Julie Morgan, who was a Labour MP in Cardiff, I regularly used to sign motions in Parliament in support of votes at 16. So I leave you to reflect whether I'm particularly likely to have changed my mind. I do note, by the way, that in the Scottish referendum, which was an exciting and pulsating campaign, 16 and 17-year-olds did have the chance to vote, and I think it led to a real engagement by young people. But the idea of, it's a matter for Parliament to decide, the idea of raising the voting age is absolutely unthinkable. I can't think of anything more obviously off-putting or a more negative message to send to young people than to raise the voting age. I think that is barking. And, it may stay the same, but as I say, when I last opined about this matter before your question, I argued for the voting age to 16.
Thank you. Any more questions? That young man over there, right there.
Mr. Speaker.
Hi.
Many believe that you are the reason behind driving Sir Robert Rogers out of his job, snubbing David Laxler and choosing Carol Mills for the Australian Parliament to become the new Women's Clerk. What are your reasons for this?
Well, I'm afraid I don't accept those things. Robert Rogers was an extremely competent clerk of the House who served for 3 years. He always told me that he intended to serve for around 3 years, and he did. He served for around 3 years, just under, and then signalled that he wanted to stand down as clerk. Robert was a very competent clerk of the House, and I dealt with him every day, and we worked together, and we agreed about some things, we didn't agree about other things. But his decision to go was entirely his choice. I mean, he wasn't dismissed. He had letters patent. He had an appointment which had been approved by Buckingham Palace, and so he had the right to continue if he wanted to do so. He chose to go, and he's now been elevated to the House of Lords, and I wish him well in what he goes on to do. I don't think there's any secret about the fact that, as I said in earlier explanation to, I think, the first question, I happen to think there is a difference between the ability to be a good clerk and the skill set that is required in the running of the House of Commons as an employer, as a service provider, as a heritage site. The skill set is different. You know, having a sort of top academic, for example, and having someone who can manage a college or a university, in my opinion, the skill sets are simply different. I mean, theoretically, you could have someone who's a great constitutional advisor and top quality proceduralist and also a brilliant manager in one person, but, you know, I think on the law of averages it's not particularly likely. As I say, I salute the work that Robert did as clerk. I recognise David Nartzler, who's the acting clerk at the moment, as a very, very competent clerk. We're having an advertisement, a recruitment for the new clerk at the moment. It will not be for a clerk and chief executive, it will be simply for a clerk of the House. David is a candidate, so there may well be other candidates, and you know, you'll understand that the selection panel will have to make a decision about that matter in the next few weeks. Forced to choose a clerk and chief executive in the summer, because people had resisted my wish to split the two roles, we thought this person from the Australian Parliament, Carol Mills, was going to be the best. Some of my colleagues didn't want that. They didn't like the idea of somebody coming in from another parliament, and they didn't think she was fully qualified to do the clerkly side of the role. So I paused the process. We had a look at all of these issues, and a committee chaired by Jack Straw, the former Foreign Secretary and one-time Leader of the House, decided that yes, there should be a clerk post and a Director General of the House post. So we're going to recruit to each of those posts. If you're asking me, has there been some sort of plot or dirty work? Absolutely not. There have been honourable differences of opinion about who should serve at the top in important posts. I think that those differences of opinion have been resolved, but my concern, you know, is, if I may say so, as the late Tony Benn used to say, is with the issues. Tony always used to say, whenever he was challenged about this personality or that, Tony Benn always used to say, it's not about personalities, it's about the issues. And I stand by that view. It's about getting the structure right, making sure we've got the competencies that we need. But if I got some down on any particular individual, or ambition to prevent one person advancing, or determination to ensure that another person advances, no, I just want what's best for the House of Commons. The easiest thing for me to have done back in the summer would just have been to go along with, you know, exactly the same old approach, recruiting someone that frankly I didn't think was necessarily best placed to do both sets of tasks, instead of which I said, well, actually, I don't think that's going to work. Several colleagues agreed with me and some didn't. We've looked at it again and we've come forward with what I think is a reformist approach, a clerk and a separate Director General. But there's not been any dirty work at the crossroads, and I'm sure you don't, but certainly you shouldn't believe everything you read in the Daily Fail or the Daily Telegraph. I mean, both of those papers have been going downhill and down market for a very long time, and some of the people who volunteer their opinions by scribbling their third-rate stuff in those newspapers, they volunteer their opinions with all the extreme self-confidence or complete ignorance of the subject of the discussion.
Thank you. Have we got any other questions for Mr. Speaker? Whoa. Can we have this young lady here, please?
In law, common law is quite hard to change if it gets into like position, because you have to have a similar case that gets into a position. For example, if it's in the Supreme Court, you have to get up to the Supreme Court. Do you think there should be some sort of process where law which judges disapprove on, but they aren't in a position to change, is reviewed to see if it doesn't agree with common views or if it's unjust?
Gosh, I've never really thought about that. Should there be a procedure whereby a judge, through disapproval of a particular law, can trigger a change in the law?
Like a committee reviews whether or not it's still just or reflects common views?
Well, yes. I think I would argue that, you know, our present arrangements are not fundamentally defective. I mean, judges are not short of platforms from which to speak if they think particular laws are in some way defective. So they can certainly attract platforms to make a case for law to be changed. We do, on some areas of policy that are notably complex, tend to have almost running reviews. We have a thing called the Tax Law Rewrite Project, or the Tax Simplification Project. It's almost an ambition for every government to try to find a way of simplifying tax law. Although the trouble is, you know, we're always adding new and different taxes or taking others away. So it's a kind of ongoing journey. And I'm not sure off the top of my head that I've got any sense of whether we need a new mechanism to review law in those circumstances, and if so, what it should be. So the honest answer is I'm not sure. Do you have a sense of that?
No, it's good. What do you think?
Well, some laws, they can go for years without being changed. I mean, recklessness,
Yes.
it was made to be objective in 1960s,
Yeah.
and it only got changed to be subjective
Yeah.
in the early 21st century. And we noticed that a lot of the cases, there was injustice because like people who had disabilities,
Yes.
who couldn't accurately perceive the situation,
Yeah.
it was being observed from objective situation.
Yes, yes.
So
Yeah. I'm not quite sure. I suppose what I'm uncertain about, I've not really thought about it, as you can tell, is what would the mechanism. I'm not sure that a judge ought to have the right. A judge makes a judgment in a particular case. I'm not sure that I would be comfortable with the notion that just because a judge disapproves of a particular law, that should trigger an immediate review of the law. I mean, there is there's this Criminal Cases Review Commission and so on, but those are usually quite narrow criteria that would have to be met for a case to be reviewed. I would be happy to correspond on the matter, having given it further thought and taken some advice from some of my specialists who could offer advice in Parliament, and I might then be able to give you a better or more satisfactory answer if you're remotely interested in writing to me or sending me an email on the subject. But I don't think I can give you a better answer than I've given you today.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we only have time for one more question,
Okay.
I think.
All right.
But I don't want to pick.
Well, in that case,
What you
you can take it. Well, you can
It's
take
not
a
fair,
couple,
is
and
it?
I'll give very short answers.
Okay.
Whose hands have been up the longest? Well, the trouble is, everybody's. You've had your hand up for a while, and I want to take a female colleague. Who have we got? Your good self. Yeah. Go on.
Mr. Speaker,
yeah.
I believe that MPs have to be in the House of Commons in order to vote.
Yeah.
Should they be allowed to vote online also?
And the second one.
do you think that Parliament has a duty to be representative of British society?
Thank you. Should MPs have to be in Parliament to vote? I think in general terms they should. I'm not very keen on MPs being able to vote from hundreds of miles away. I think there is something to be said for the idea that an MP should have at least to be in the Palace of Westminster where the debate is taking place, subject to the caveat that I think if a member is ill, the arrangement whereby you literally have to have sick people coming through the lobby seems a bit ridiculous. We do have a nodding through arrangement for members who are ill, but they normally have to be on the parliamentary estate. I think my attitude would be that if a member wanted from even 100 miles away, when badly ill, to register a vote, online or electronically or by email, whatever, then it ought to be possible for that member to do so. But not just because they don't feel like coming to Westminster or because they've got another engagement. I think in circumstances of illness, there would be a case for saying, well, they ought to be able to vote from a distance. It's not just about their vote that matters to them, it's about them having a chance to represent their constituents. Do I think that Parliament has a duty to represent the country as a whole? I don't think that it's essential that we have, to be an exact mirror image of society. We don't have, if one particular ethnic community is 1% of the population, does that mean that 1% of MPs have to be from that population? I don't think I would be as strict or rigid about it or as mechanistic about it as that, but I do myself think that the makeup of Parliament matters. And when you sometimes get commentators, sometimes very right-wing commentators who say, it doesn't matter a damn, why is there this obsession with having more black or minority people or more people with disabilities or more gay people who are MPs or more women, all that matters is having lots of good people. No, I think it does matter that Parliament is broadly representative of the country. For example, our debates on a great many issues are much better now for having more women MPs, but do we have enough? No, we have 22% female representation. Women are about 52% of the population, or they were last time I looked. So, and I do think that matters. I think that we need to look and sound a bit more like the country we aspire to represent. I will take one, and you noticed how reluctant Denise was to risk upsetting her clientele, so to speak. I will take two more, if you can bear it, and then we'll probably have to call it a day. We'll take the gentleman at the back and the young gentleman there, please.
What's your view on the policy of?
I can't hear you. Okay, well,
What's your view on the policy of English votes for English laws?
English votes for English laws.
English votes for English laws. Thank you.
What effect do you believe it would have on Parliament if the House of Lords were to be elected?
Thank you. English votes for English laws. Well, that also is a highly political matter. The Conservative Party is broadly sympathetic to English votes for English laws. In other words, the idea that it's not right, in their thinking, for Scottish and Welsh MPs representing Scottish and Welsh constituencies to be able to vote on matters that affect England, given that there is a separate Scottish Parliament and a Welsh Assembly, and they've got a number of matters reserved for themselves. I understand why there is some resentment in England. I do. And it may well be that we will get to an arrangement which is more satisfactory to English voters or the political parties that feel that there ought to be some sort of reservation issues. My slight hesitation, and it is a hesitation and a caveat, is this. We want, as far as possible, the House of Commons to remain a unitary parliament, a parliament for the whole of the UK. And I am nervous about the idea of compartmentalising every category and saying, oh, well, only English MPs should vote on English matters. Eventually, if we're not careful, we're going to get to a position of saying, oh, well, so-and-so affects Yorkshire. Only Yorkshire MPs should vote on that, or only Lancashire MPs should vote on that, or only London MPs should vote on that. And I'm uneasy about that. So, you know, I don't think it's as simple as being resolved by a slogan. I'm uneasy about that. I think the issue needs to be thought through very fully. What effect would it have on the House of Commons if the House of Lords were elected? It is uncertain. Some people think it would undermine the power and the importance or the primacy of the House of Commons. Personally, when I was free to hold a view on this matter and could be relied upon regularly to express it before I became Speaker, I did argue in favour of a predominantly or even potentially wholly elected second chamber. Where I think they went wrong in this Parliament was that people who argued for an elected House of Lords tried to reassure people who were against it by saying, oh, don't worry, the House of Commons will remain the primary chamber. And people who were nervous about an elected Lords didn't believe that, and I'm not surprised they didn't believe it. What is needed, if you're going to reassure people, is a clear delineation, or codification of functions, where you describe very specifically what will be done by the Commons, what will be done by the Lords, and what happens if there's a clash, who wins, who rules, who decides, etc. And that wasn't provided for by the government's legislation. You probably know the Liberal Democrats were very keen on an elected second chamber. The Conservative Party was almost split down the middle on the matter. Labour was broadly in favour, but when the Labour Party saw that the government was running into trouble on it, the Labour Party, being in opposition, played politics with it in a sense. I'm not criticising them for that, but they did. And the Conservative plan ended up foundering because there was a large number of Tory MPs who couldn't bear the idea of an elected second chamber. I think if there were an elected second chamber, it would produce quite a lot of tension and conflict between the two chambers, although that wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. It might slow up lawmaking. Well, slowing up lawmaking might not be a bad thing. I'm not sure we suffer from too few laws. But if you ask me, do I think we're going to get an elected second chamber a week next Tuesday, or any time soon, I don't know, sir, whether you are a gambler, but if you are remotely contemplating going to a betting shop to bet on anything, I wouldn't, if I were you, bet very much money. And certainly don't bet any home you own to own or pay rent on. I wouldn't bet on an elected second chamber. I think that it's taken 100 years to get some very modest reforms to the House of Lords. I think an elected second chamber may at some point happen. But is it likely to happen before you leave Luton College or before you leave university? I think the answer is it is extremely unlikely to happen very quickly. And with that, I'll leave it there and hope that you've managed to remain awake, and I'm very delighted that you have.
Thank you very much. Now, before I ask you to show your appreciation, I must clear up the glaring omission that I made earlier on. I'm so sorry. And I did introduce Dr. Edge Watchorn, sat down there, who's Head of Education at the House of Parliament. Okay, who's come down to visit the college as well. And I would like you now to show...
She's a fantastic head of the Education Service who organises what we do in Parliament for school groups and others, and helps to organise a great programme of events for me outside. Now, she's actually Dr. Watchall, so she's also very clever. And a great support to me, so I should probably a representation. Actually, that's fantastic.
And I'd like you now to show your appreciation to